Hello! Okay, I'm really excited about this little video that I'm doing today. We are going to talk about convincing me. So the psychology of following up with your leads and how to use it to book clients. Now this might not be what you normally would expect because we're going to talk a little bit more from the neurolinguistic side of things. So basically like how people think unconsciously and process information, those kind of things, and how this can be used in deciding how you follow up with people. We're also going to talk about convincing people. How many times do you want to convince people? The benefits of convincing people more than once, all those kind of things. How you can bring that into your follow-up process with clients. So first of all, you always hear people say, is there fortune in the follow-up, right? And that's a very common term people say. And a lot of times people do need to be followed up with, right? They might inquire and they'll forget about you, or they'll just get really busy and you might want to follow up with them. Just be like, hey, remember you asked for this product or service. Would you like to talk about it some more? All those kind of things. And people often ask me like, okay, like when do I know when to stop, right? And then because for me, if I get an email 4 or 5, 6 times, I'm getting a little frustrated, even if I say, hey, I'm not interested, or you try and be nice about it, and you're just like, not interested at this time or something, and people just don't always get the hint, that kind of thing. So sometimes people get super aggressive with convincing, and it's really annoying. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's the psychology of thinking like, once, especially through a personal brand, once somebody connects with you, that's kind of the convincing process right there. And you just sit back and wait. And then if they inquire with you, then it's just a case of, okay, well, they'll get to me when they're ready, right? And so where exactly is the sweet spot? And so let's talk a little bit about neurolinguistics around how people process when it comes to the follow-ups. So really, in general, and I'm saying in general because when it comes to what the product or service is, this can obviously change a little bit. So somebody who is, for example, looking to buy a house, their decision process is probably going to be slightly different than if they were buying a new pair of shoes, right? So there's going to be a little bit more convincing process to it, right? And when I say convincing, what that pretty much means is how many times does that person have to think about or interact with the product or service or the person leading the conversation, in this case, you as the service provider or personal brand, before they actually have to commit to buying. So when I say convincers in this video, that's what I mean, right? How many times do you have to convince somebody to work with you, really, right? And so that's where things like emails come into play. And it's like, okay, if somebody inquires with you, you have to follow up 1, 2, 3 times before they book. That would be, say, like a 3 times convincer in the email process, right? And so when it comes to the neurolinguistic side of things, and again, that's how people think and process their information, a lot of people, this is actually built into their unconscious mind that they have to be convinced a certain amount of times before they buy something. Have you ever met that person who, even if they go to the mall, they have to go around the mall like 4 or 5 times before they decide to buy a t-shirt? That's somebody with a very high convincer. They need to be convinced many times in order to buy something. The same person will likely carry that towards everything that they do in their life when they're buying things. That's like a lot of times people, you have those friends who think about everything. Maybe it's even your partner, right? Maybe you like to just see something, you buy it. Maybe they have to think about it a few times. They have to do research. They have to talk to people about it. They have to go back and see it like 3 or 4 times. That's somebody who needs to be convinced a lot. Or maybe if you're the person who's like, oh, I like that, I buy it. That would be a very low convincing person, right? And so this works a lot to do in your service-based business as well. And even if you do have products, because people need to go through that process unconsciously. It's almost like a loop. They have to be like, okay, I see the product or service. I talk to the person. I have to think about it. They go through the loop again. I have to talk to them again. I have to think about it. They go through the loop again. I have to talk to the person again. I have to think about it. They go through the loop. Or maybe it's like, okay, I see the thing. I have to have some space around it. Then they go through the loop.
I see the thing, I have to go through the loop. And they have to go through the loop so many times. And that's just the way their brain processes. And more times than not, they're usually around the same number for everything that they do. So when it comes to an email follow-up, somebody who has a lot of those loops has to go through the process so many times. Email follow-ups, or even just follow-ups in general, so we're talking phone calls, Instagram DMs, Facebook messages, all the things and how you follow up. Some people really just need to be followed up with more and more times because they just need to go through that loop. That's their process. There's nothing wrong with that. That can actually be extremely beneficial for people who need to save some money. Those people tend to not spend as much money on things. They tend to not be quite as impulsive with their buying. They tend to be very intentional with their buying because they have to think about it so many times. And even if it's a case of they need to be reminded a lot of times, that's just part of the process, right? And so on the other end of the scale, somebody might see your services, inquire with you, be ready to go and book, right? And that's going to be somebody who doesn't need to be convinced as many times. And so basically, it's just literally a neural pathway in their brain that says, I have to go through this loop a certain amount of times. A lot of times, as I mentioned before, it will be around the same number, which is very, very fascinating. It's been studied a lot in neurolinguistic patterns. And so you can even think about your own life. When you think about making a purchase, how do you go through that purchase? So think super simply, say you're buying a new shirt for a party or a business meeting that you're going to. Do you go to the mall, go in the first store you see that you know you're going to like, find something, buy it, and leave? Or do you maybe go in the whole mall? Do you maybe go through a few stores? Do you maybe go back to the stores? Do you even take it a step further? Maybe you shop online first, then you go to the store, then you come back to the store, then you buy. Think about some of your own purchases, then go bigger purchases. What are some of the bigger things have you bought? Have you bought a house before? Are you somebody who's like, okay, you look everything up on MLS, you narrow down to say 4 or 5 houses, you go see them, then you pick a house and then you're done, right? That might, just by me saying that, somebody might be like, wow, that's a really quick decision for a big purchase. But that's how I did it with my own purchase. I knew that I was ready to buy a house. I brought up 4 or 5 listings. My dad's a realtor, so he's like, okay, let's go see them all in one day. We did. We ended up seeing an extra one because we didn't realize it was on the market. I saw it. I wanted it. I decided that's the one I was going to get. That's literally how I even bought my first house. So think about your own buying processes and then apply that to things like service-based businesses, which most personal brands are, right? And so when it comes to even watching this video, right? Like working with me, for example, like, did you look at my stuff on Instagram for a year? Did you see me then decide that this is going to be something you want to somebody you want to work with? Did you have to see my content so many times? You had to talk to me so many times, those kind of things. So think about your own buying habits and start mapping it out and see, like, are you somebody who needs to see things many, many times? Or are you somebody who's just like, okay, I've seen this a couple times. I've been reminded once or twice, and then I dive and I buy, right? So when you take a step back and you look at your own life, you might see, okay, how do I apply this to my clients now, right? And so the first thing that this should do for you is realize that a lot of us want somebody to email us. We reply, and then they book right away, right? You're probably nodding right now. That would be the best case scenario. Yes, of course it would. But the truth is that's not always the case, right? And so a lot of us really would like that all the time, right? And so you might need to follow up with somebody a couple more times because they need that convincing, right? Now here's the negative side to somebody who's got a high convincer. And what I mean by, again, high convincers, they just naturally need to be convinced many, many times, is that when you work with that person, likely that pattern's going to repeat itself every time. So they probably saw you online. needed to think about it 5, 6, 7 times. They emailed you. Maybe you really want this client, so you followed up 5, 6, 7 times. They finally book. Now this is going to repeat through, like most likely going to repeat every single thing that you do. So if they sign a contract, you might need to follow up with them 5 or 6 times. If they need to book an appointment with you to actually do the service, you might need to follow up 5 or 6 times. Even reminding them to pay, you might need to follow up 5 or 6 times. All those kind of things. Expect to convince them many, many, many times along the way. Now, before you say, ew, that sounds like a lot of work, it can be a lot of work. However, you can help this person through that process. So if you find that this is a person, like, this is naturally how some people are, and again, it can be really, really good, and I'll tell you why in a second, you might want to, like, streamline your process with this person. So if you recognize it right away, especially after your follow-up and you book it, maybe start to lump things together, right? And so instead, if you are normally somebody who sends out a contract, payment, and then you book the next appointment, get them on a phone call and do all those 3 things together. Help them through the process with it, right? And so that's a really good method in, like, chunking together some of the things that they need to actually work through. So if you have somebody who needs to go through this process many, many times, you'll want to make sure that they get it all done at once, right? Okay, so let's quickly talk about why is this a good thing for somebody. So if you actually go through the process with somebody who needs to be convinced 5 or 6 times, the good side of that is usually by the time they commit to you, they are fully committed. Maybe they still need to be reminded about other things, but the chances are they've thought about it a lot of times. They've had to be reminded, so you haven't annoyed them. They still want to work with you, right? So the person who needs to be convinced that many times, if they still say yes at the end, then that's good. Me personally, if somebody takes more than 3 times to be convinced, I will question whether or not they actually want to work together, right? And I will actually even say that before. And sometimes people are just like, maybe not. So you need to recognize what is the difference between just somebody who needs to be, like, convinced and reminded, or somebody who actually just really doesn't care too much. So that could be another video, but giving you an idea of, like, what is your vibe with this person, right? Now, a lot of you are probably thinking right now, okay, I want somebody who's going to have a 0 or 1 convincer, right? So, like, they email you and they just book right away. So the negative side of this one is that the person doesn't necessarily think on things, or the commitment could be lower, right? And so you think about the person who impulse buys, right? And so that somebody who doesn't really have much of a convincer at all. They see something, they buy it. They see something, they buy it, right? I used to be one of those people, and I actually had to do some neurolinguistic work in order to put myself through the loop again, so that I would actually think about my purchases a little bit more, because I would just see something, commit to it, and say, yeah, cool, yeah. And then also I still run into some issues with that now when I'm, like, excited about service, excited about working with somebody, even excited about collaborating with something I'm really excited about, and I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And then I realized later that I'm like, okay, I don't actually have the capacity. I didn't have time to think about this, that kind of thing. I just say yes a little bit too easily. So I've actually added a convincer in there to make sure that I think about the things a little bit more, and I'm committing a little bit more to the things that I actually really, really want. So when you think about that with clients, do you really want them to just say yes all the time? Well, yes. However, you want them to have a checkpoint there, right? So we really have to find that sweet spot. Now, how can we streamline our businesses to find that sweet spot, still appeal to the people who think about things a little bit, and not waste a lot of your time, not waste a lot of time convincing, not wasting a lot of time following up? And the answer, as you probably know, is through your personal brand. The convincing process can actually start through your personal brand online. So when somebody sees your content, when somebody consumes your free stuff, all the value that you put out there, that's them running through their convincer process, right? They need to be convinced in that way, but it's automated in a way because you don't know that they're being convinced every single time, right? Most people are probably around a 2 to 4 convincer. So they can actually consume your content, get convinced, And by the time they actually message you, they could still be at that same stage of going through that process, but still ready to book. So that's why your personal brand is so important, to have such high value content out there, a good idea of who you are. People need to hear your voice, see you, all of the things, putting yourself out there, because you're going to run them through that convincer process in advance. And that is the sweet spot. That really is the sweet spot, because then by the time they email you, then they're ready to go. They probably don't need a lot of follow-up. Now, that being said, they might need some follow-up later on, maybe just in booking appointments or reminders to actually do the work, that kind of thing. But that could be part of your process in actually asking your new clients, right? So you can even casually ask people about their buying habits, right? Like if you, depending on what you do for work, you could actually ask them their convincing habits based on what you do. So if you are a mortgage broker, you can ask them, okay, if this isn't their first home, ask them, when you bought your last home, how many homes did you check out, right? You could make it very lighthearted. It's just casual conversation. I know with a lot of realtors, I have that conversation where it's like they have some clients who want to see 100 homes, and they have some clients who just want to see 5, right? So, but depending on your industry, you can figure out a question of asking them some of their buying habits. Obviously, those buying habits are not set in stone, and there's some flexibility, as I mentioned, but in general, it would give you a sense to somebody who's a very fast decision maker, or somebody who needs a little bit of follow-up along the way. And it will just set you up for success, because there's nothing wrong with follow-ups. That's basically what an email nurturing sequence does, all those kind of things. You can start to build your business around the people that you're starting to attract. Maybe you find that you just really need to attract people who need a lot of reminders, and that's part of your business. Like if you're a virtual assistant, for example, I bet you that you will probably have people who need reminding in that way, right? And again, just because somebody typically makes decisions quickly doesn't mean they will never need reminding, and vice versa. But just really finding that sweet spot. Okay, now, here's the final little piece of advice I want to give. If you have too many follow-ups with somebody, and we all have been there, right? You feel like you're like, okay, I want this business, but I've followed up so many times and it's not going anywhere, right? Or maybe they come back to you and they say, I'm not ready right now. So we really want to focus on the mindset with this. If you find that you're following up 6 or 7 times, that's not super sustainable in your business. You could do automations with that, with a CRM, that kind of thing, automated emails. But really, somebody who needs convincing that much for what you're providing might be a little bit challenging, right? So we really want to adopt that bless and release mentality. So if somebody's not responding to you at all, let them go, right? When I talk about follow-ups, this also requires a commitment of communication back with the other person. So if you're following up 5, 6, 7 times and you're not getting a response, this is not working. So I just want to get that little asterisk note in there that if you're following up that many times and you're not getting a response, please just don't follow up anymore, because that's not an interested person. So all of these things said, when I say following up and convincing, there should be some commitment of communication back, which means that somebody's saying, sorry, I'm not ready yet, or thank you for the information. Maybe not every time, or they're at least opening your emails if you're checking those kind of stats. And if you're not getting that, then definitely just bless and release. Especially if you're getting an initial inquiry, you follow up once, maybe twice, and you don't hear anything, just bless and release, right? And, let it go, because that energy that you are holding for somebody to respond, they're not thinking about you. And so you're wasting your energy on them, and that could be put towards somebody else who actually wants to interact with you, or it could be put into your marketing, or it could be put into learning, like watching videos like this, right? And really moving your business forward. So the more we focus on those leads that aren't getting back to us, it's time wasted, right? Now, if somebody does get back to you and they say, hey, thank you for responding, or thank you for the follow-up, I'm just not ready yet, or I'm going to go a different direction, the most important thing that you can do, and this is not necessarily to do with convincing, is frame for future work together. And what this means is if somebody says, yeah, I'm just not ready, or any of that kind of thing, say, that is totally okay. When and if you're ever ready, I'll be here waiting for you because I know it will be the perfect time to work together. Or however you want to spin that. Because what that does is it keeps the channel open, but for you, you can move on. You can just decide that client's going somewhere else, back to the bless and release. But so many times when I have framed a future work together, people have come back to me. Because when we come back to the convincer thing, is that maybe they needed to be convinced that another option actually isn't good for them, right? Or they need to be convinced further, right? Or even just, it wasn't the right time, it wasn't the right alignment. And so many times I talk to clients, they say they just don't respond, or they kind of get a little bit upset about it for wasting time or anything like that. But when you're frame it in such a positive way for this person and say things like, you know what, no problem, I just want things to be a perfect fit. I want things to be right for you. If things work out in the future, I'll be here waiting for you. Totally, just all those juicy, positive comments that basically say, it's totally cool, only come back if you feel is right for you, will really set you up for a really positive connection to that person, and they will most likely come back if it is the right client for you. It's the right soulmate client for you. I had this happen to me about 5 or 6 times last year where somebody, especially for photography, somebody said, I was out of their price range. They weren't sure they could invest, that kind of thing. They weren't sure about the process, all that kind of stuff, even though we were clear about everything. And then they went to another photographer that was cheaper and didn't provide the same value experience. And then they ended up coming back because they weren't happy, right? And so if I had not responded to them with kindness and said, you know what, that's totally cool, you have to do what's right for you, they probably wouldn't have come back because they wouldn't have felt like the door was still open. So keep that in mind as you are working through your follow-up process. When people respond, always respond with kindness, always respond with the mentality of alignment. Things like soulmate clients. Your soulmate clients will change over time, and expect them that sometimes they'll come back and sometimes they'll leave, right? I hope that was helpful. It was a little bit of a word vomit with convincing me. I wanted this topic to be just very informational from the heart and what I was thinking about with it. And I'd love to know if it's helpful for you. I'd love to know what you think your convincers are. I'd love to know if you've noticed this with a pattern in your clients, and any other tips or things that you might want to know about this topic or anything else related to it. All right, see you in the next video.